to be pragmatic just means you don't dream wild dreams, that's all. I mean, so you won't see anything coming out of me that say, my gosh, I've never seen anything like that before. How could he arrive at something so fantastic? No, you don't see that out of my work, no. I limit my own imagination, let's put it this way. You say pragmatic, maybe I want to build. To me, build. Le Corbusier made many, many drawings, but ultimately, if you ask him, it's the building that makes the difference, the result. But today, you can realize dreams, even though they may not be practical. But not in my days. There's no possibility of that. So therefore, it's a time. And now look at people of my generation, or even younger than my generation. Who were the ones that are dreamers that create fantastic things, like many of the architects today are doing, like Frank Gehry, people like that building those things, which my days, you say maybe it's the time. I think so. There's a lot to do with time. And I think there's a tremendous change in that. Part of it is because of affluence. The world is becoming wealthier, and people are, and then look at the art world today, what is going on. It's incredible. Millions of dollars for something selling for small paintings, you know. Mm-hmm. This kind of thing also applies to architecture. So therefore, there's sort of there's the limit is no longer the kind of limit we face in our time. Really not. Even visionary architect nowadays, like who would you say? Kaiser. Nowadays, visionary architects outside of Le Corbusier, there are very few. They are, but today there are many. But how many of them will survive 25 years from now?
Do you consider yourself to be a modern architect?
A modern architect?
Yeah.
Modern means that you have to do your best at that time. I would consider myself one of those. In those days, Harvard didn't really have very many students. There are many of them are South Americans, by the way, and there are many ladies, like you have today, many. Some of them marry into architectural family, like Gene Bodman married Fletcher, and Chip Harkner's wife also studied in my class. So it's an interesting class to walk into. And I have to say this, I think that Gropius was much more open-minded than most people think. International style in those days is not a bad word. In fact, it's a guide in some ways, saying that, Gideon wrote a book called Mechanization Takes Command. And Gropius, in fact, told us in the class, saying that because of mechanization, and the world will eventually become more and more unified. Some will happen earlier, others will happen later, and society therefore will become more alike, and therefore architecture will follow. I didn't accept that at that time, and that's not a problem for Gropius. Gropius would say, what do you want to do? What do you think of that? And so I said, well, no, there are many other conditions, which I say I came from China, and I have a slightly different point of view. And I said that I come from a world which has a long historical tradition, and cultural tradition is very important to us. History is long. You can't lose that. Oh, really? Right, okay. And I said, well, because of that, I can't expect that architecture in China will eventually be like architecture in Germany. I don't think it's going to happen. There are many constraints, there are many influences that continue. Oh, well, give me an example. Oh, it's very challenging. You cannot argue with Gropius unless you are really well prepared. I wasn't well prepared. I said, well, let's think about this. I said, well, think about a museum. You see, I was already interested in museumizing because art objects were very important to me. I say, look at the art object of the Orient, particularly China. They're porcelain, ivories, scrolls, calligraphy. I say, you don't put it behind columns. Monumental buildings, like our museum, the Metropolitan Museum. You can't do that because the objects and the museum have nothing in common. So therefore, a museum in China has to look different. If they prove it. That Gropius, very open. So I chose my own subject. I did. And he did not disagree with that. So in the end, it became a conversation that Gropius and Breuer took part. There's a certain openness about Bauhaus that most of us in that time, and even today, still think of it as a box. Yeah. It wasn't.
What were buildings or architects that you respected or looked up to?
I think, this may surprise, I think Le Corbusier. There are 3 volumes published in the 40s, actually the 30s, but I didn't get to it until the 40s. And when I was at MIT, I spent all my time reading those 3 books. Today it's probably no longer considered important anymore, but in those days, those books are very influential. So I would say Le Corbusier ahead of Mies and Gropius. In the early years, I was very impressed with what Mies had done. I went to Chicago several times to look at his promenade apartment. I said, my gosh, wonderful. You know, Long Lakeshore Drive.
Sure.
And I went to see Farnsworth House much later. They're all beautiful, absolutely perfection. I said, well, there's a man who really searched for perfection in everything he does. But what disappointed me in Mies also came about the same time when I visited IIT. You know that?
Yeah.
Campus.
Yeah.
I found there's no space. I mean, when you do a campus, it's not one building. Mies no longer satisfied. So the lack of spatial...
The space between the buildings, you mean?
Not only that, relationship of buildings, excitement, it's lacking. It's become boring. That's where Le Corbusier came in. Then I turned back to Le Corbusier. I turned back. I remember I made a model of Kips Bay, not Kips Bay, of the Helix. And at that time, he became friends of Le Corbusier. And Le Corbusier, he asked Le Corbusier to come and look at the Helix model. First time I met Le Corbusier, and he came and looked at it. Only one problem. He said, where is the sun? You see, he was doing a lot of work at that time in South America. His brise soleil is designed to resist the sun, you know. The sun is what helped him design, to create sculptural form. My Helix has no orientation. It's north, east, southwest. The question, he said, I like it, but where's the sun? That's his critique.
Did you respond?
My answer was not particularly memorable to him. I say, New York, we have air conditioning, and our view is more important than the sun. He did not accept that. That was the end of our conversation. The second time I met him was under very different circumstances. It was in Paris, in his apartment, Rue de Sèvres, I think. And he wanted to sell Zeckendorf the idea of doing a sculpture for UN. And so he invited me to come and see it. So I went to his studio, and he had an office in a box, a modular box. It's about, my guess is about 8 feet by 8 feet square or something like that. No window. It's a white box. He has a desk there. And he has a piece of sculpture on the wall. And he wanted me to tell Zeckendorf that he was prepared to do works about, to do art, not architecture. By then he's already done UN, he's already participated in it. He wanted to do a major piece of art. And he said, asked me to convey the idea to Zeckendorf. So, looking back at it, are they important? No. But it all adds up to something. So it was the transition, let's say, from Gropius to Mies to Le Corbusier. In between, there's Breuer, always there.
And Breuer was, when you would get together, would you show each other your work that you're working on and say, what do you think of this? And
yeah, I did more than he did to me. He was of course not my teacher as much as my wife's teacher, but I respected him enough that I could consider him also my teacher. But in a way, it's because our age difference was not that great. Also, my friend. Now you're talking about the 60s now. Then we met many, yeah. Oh, yes, Arp was there. I got to know Arp. You know Arp, A-R-P?
Sure,
Arp and his wife came to, and Breuer had a house then in New Canaan, suspended by cable. You remember that? Bounces.
Yeah.
And we met many artists at that time in Breuer's house. And that was unusual period in some ways. I rather like that part of it, mixing up architecture with art. I think that Bauhaus did help me to connect architecture with art, because the two disciplines are very much related, especially plastic arts. Since becoming an architect, of course, I have come to realize that there is a role for art to play in architecture. For a long time, art is only a painting hung on the wall. But I learned a lot afterwards. I went to see, I went to see Picasso's work in Oslo. I don't think you know that, but Oslo. First time I saw something in art that is a scale of modern architecture. You don't hang paintings on the wall, that's not it. But it becomes part of architecture, very hard, because scale is so different. But Picasso opened it up for the first time. Picasso had a piece of sculpture which is now in Princeton. Maybe it's a duplicate of it. The maquette is only this big. It's enlarged to something like 12 feet high. I said, well, there's probably no limit to it. I said, it can be 25 feet, can it not? They said, maybe it can be. Then I said, why? Why is it? You can't do that with a Rodin. I said, maybe it's because of the abstract quality of it. You no longer have a scale. The human figures no longer has a scale because they're dehumanized, But people don't want to be an architect, because the opportunities were not great. I think that is the reason, not because people don't want to be, but they say, to be an architect, what do you do? So therefore, people are discouraged from being an architect. But today, it becomes very popular. Yes, you want to be an architect. Look what they're doing here, some exciting things, There is all of a sudden feeling there's something, it's open, there's opportunity there. But not in my days, no. My sons, for instance, who eventually became architects, I said, at that time I discouraged them. I said, you don't want to get into architecture, really? Because the opportunities are not very good. That was back, now they are now in their 50s, 60s, older than you are. But even then, that would be 1960s. I tried to discourage them, but not that much. Today, if you are any good, you don't have to be great. You have work.
You think so? Yeah, maybe.
Low-cost housing was very important. There's no work. Urban renewal. How many of you know about urban renewal?
Yeah.
Those were the days. That's all we had.
Yeah.
You know, slum clearance, a horrible word.
Yeah.
You know, in those days, of course, that term no longer used.
Yeah.
Urban redevelopment, they came in afterwards.
Yeah.
That's the kind of work we have. And for me, I spent 10 years on low-cost housing.
Yeah.
10 years of my life on low-cost housing. Urban renewal. You don't do architectural masterpieces,
Yeah.
but you learn. You learn the constraint. So today, I think lack of that constraint is both a privilege and also, I think, a liability to many of the young architects today. So freedom is not always good. I had to design a house. Already I had 2 children. You can't live in New York with 2 children, they're young, so I had to say I have a house. So my house is not a house like Philip's, a show house. My house is for bringing up a family. So therefore it's built on a shoestring. It's built for a real need, let's put it this way. And but I did have a chance to learn to build my own for the first time. Because nobody commissioned me to build a house. So I decided to do my own. And so that helped me to start to develop some confidence that maybe I can do buildings on my own. Now, Kips Bay is a very important project. I'm not going to include in it, but
It's okay to talk about it still.
very important for me. Gave me real confidence about doing things. But today you look at it and say, what is Kips Bay? You know, nobody look at it. But it will still be there. It's here, there now. Everybody says, Bill Zeckendorf, here is the great builder. So he started to want to expand. He said, now that I have an opportunity to expand, I need to have an architectural department. The first thing we do is to find someone to lead it. So he went about. And one of his emissary, his name's Abbott, I guess, from a friend of Nelson Rockefeller, came to Cambridge and asked me whether I would be interested. I said, what is that? He told me all about Zeckendorf, the real estate. Oh, yes, I know. He brought UN to New York. I said, well, this is interesting. So I went down to see him. And Zeckendorf sold me the idea of joining him. I thought that would be interesting too, because what alternatives do I have? I want to build, and I can't stay at Harvard teaching all. Teaching for me is a limited, for you too, I hope, a few years, and that's it. And I have to think about my future. And when he offered me to come and do something new, I joined him. It was a decision I made, which turned out to be the right one.
Yeah. Did you start off with a large office?
No, I started off by myself.
Yeah.
I was alone. I was alone for a year and a half, trying to figure out what to do. And in the meantime, I did ideas. I tried a lot of things for Zeckendorf, and among them I did a helix, which is was published at 19, Architectural Forum published it. I've never gone into postmodernism, never. You can't find any one of my projects that influenced by that movement, no. I was out of that movement from beginning to end. Never participated in it because I didn't believe in it.
I'm so curious about how you work. Do you work, like for instance, when you were describing Kips Bay, because it's, I think you were describing how that the project came out of a structural idea, really. Do you think that when you're working on projects, do you, I mean, maybe it varies from project to project, do you start with this conceptual idea about how it is built, maybe to begin with, or do you start with an image of a form that you're interested in? Do you begin with materials that you think are appropriate? Do you,
No, I don't think it's any different from any other architect. I think I don't have any preconceived notion that I can say. I don't have a style that says my building must do this. No, I don't have that. And I would say that I'm much more pragmatic, as you said. When I go to a city or a country, I'm more inclined to be open, to learn, and spend the early part of thinking not with any architecture in mind, but with to try to learn about the place, the people, the culture, the history. And that interests me more. And then out of that, sometimes it takes weeks, sometimes it takes months. I didn't tackle my project on the Persian Gulf until 6 months later. I asked for that, but I have to do a lot of reading, because I knew nothing about Islam. So therefore, that period is not a period you should have any preconceived notion. It should be completely open. In other words, it's an empty vessel first, and you fill it gradually with knowledge. Then when you feel you have reached a point now, yeah, maybe now I'm ready, then you go in to do it. Louvre, I asked for 4 months. I asked Mitterrand for 4 months. I said, I'm not going to accept the commission without asking you to give me 4 months to learn about the Louvre, which I did. So that period is so important. It's that period you must be open. Otherwise, if you have a preconceived notion, the building must do that, and then try to fill into that place, it's not my way. You ask me, am I an American architect or Chinese architect? I say, I'm both. But my technical training, without doubt, is Western. But my approach to architecture was very much influenced by my background. That's the way I think. It makes it easier for me to go into the Persian Gulf. More difficult for you to go into Persian Gulf. Really?
What do you think of the current state of architecture as it is now with the contemporary architecture? You're saying that you think it's maybe too free or something like this? There's too much. We're living in this infinite luxury of artistic freedom or something?
I think there's some good things coming out today out of that freedom. I think I would consider, for instance, Ram Koolhaas, for instance, is doing some very good things in addition to some very, very outrageous things, but he's doing some very good things. So out of that freedom, there are exceptions to it. Even today, there's a lot of limit to creativity. Don't tell me that modern architects today have freedom everywhere. No, they have limits also, but it's a different kind. Time is different. So I like to think that I'm not going to apologize for my work 50 years ago because the opportunity was not there. No, that was the best I could do, and creativity is their limit, not my own, but it's the limit that surrounded me, and I did the best I could. So, and if I were here today, a young architect, I have a different set of circumstances. I'll probably produce different kind of work. I know I would. But there is one thing I know I would not do, even if I were practicing today. I do not want to be stereotypical, saying my buildings are always of one color, my buildings are always this and this and that. No, that I would not accept. I think that limits your creativity rather than. And outside of that, my work would be entirely different today than because the time is different. I tell you, the practice of architecture is not the final product. I think that much used word of process it go in between how to reach that product. That's fascinating. I didn't know anything about Islam. I really didn't. A blank sheet of paper. Now I think I do know something. I mean, because I worked there. So you see the interesting thing now for someone of my age, where I can't do too much anymore. Well, whatever I do, I want to learn something from doing it. You know, the process of learning has become very exciting now.
So is architecture, in a way, is always a medium from which you're learning from, you think, in a way? The world, not only about architecture itself.
About world, the history of the world, the cultural tradition of a place, and not to mention the place itself, and the people you meet, and the decisions you made, wrong, right. All that leads to something that enrich oneself. It's not a profitable business for me anymore, because I spend more time than I'm compensated for. But I get a lot of satisfaction from learning. The end product is something else again. It's hard to know whether the end product justified all that effort. But I enrich myself as a human being, let's put it this way.